Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe.
One of the ground rules of Architecture Codex is that I must have visited the building. That way I can bring you the first-hand insights that only a practicing architect might observe. Well, sometimes I have to bend those rules. Recently I was in Cupertino, California, and I tried to visit the new Apple headquarters, that flying saucer big donut thing. Anyway, I went to the visitor center, but that turned out to be a completely separate building across the street. And it's actually just an Apple store with a roof deck on top, from which you can view the headquarters, but through very thick foliage. Hence, in my sketchbook, my Codex, this was all I could do. I would have been better off studying botany rather than architecture. But I didn't give up. I drove around the 175-acre campus, but the trees and foliage only got thicker. And while I could occasionally see slices of the building, no viewpoint was really worthy of another sketch. And I did not want to risk driving into an employee-only parking lot and be arrested for trespassing. It was that intimidating. So it was hard for me to decide if the obscuring landscaping was Apple being a good neighbor, providing a green park-like setting, hiding their behemoth headquarters inside this single-story residential neighborhood, or a reclusive secret campus, hidden and modern, as if Steve Jobs was a Bond villain planning the takeover of the world. Adding to the sense that inside the compound was the Spectre headquarters of Dr. No, Goldfinger, or Blofeld, is the 2004 GCHQ spy headquarters in England by Gensler and built in 2004. Conspiracy? Secret message in building form? Hard to say. The entrance to the Steve Jobs-inspired secret lair is through one visible, heavily guarded portal where an array of cold gray coaches featuring black-tinted glass windows parked. After discharging or collecting employees, some 15,000, these buses buzzed around the local streets and freeways like drone bees. The arriving Apple Starship troopers, disguised as geek code writers, entered through a high white gate through which you could barely see the main building. I got the message that the Apple World Headquarters was closed to the general public. But in fairness, the World Headquarters of Molinelli Architects is also closed to the general public. So there. The building, designed by Foster and Partners, opened in 2018 and is simplistic in its form. A big circle, a ring. It boasts being the largest LEED Platinum building in North America and is powered completely by renewable energy, with solar panels peaking at 75% of power needs, the rest by fuel cells and biofuels. Renewable energy does not exclude burning stuff. The entire campus reduced the impervious surface of the previous site, which was a Hewlett-Packard low-glass office shoebox surrounded by oceans of asphalt parking. So the new office park was not an invasion into a residential neighborhood and did add much more green space, including 4 miles of walking and jogging trails, apparently closed to the general public. We haven't seen such a noble effort to develop a site for a corporate headquarters since Architecture Codex video number 7, the General Foods World Headquarters in New York. All this renewable energy and this careful and delicate site development is why this project cost over $5 billion. There are other buildings on the site, including the Steve Jobs Theater, built for product launches, but the ring is the big architectural attraction. Some say it looks like a spaceship, but that's only because our culture has popularized the saucer form, while actual spaceships designed by big tech billionaires look very different. But that's a different subject.
And it's clear that we need to build a new campus. And what we've done is we've bought this land right here. The campus we'd like to build there is one building that holds 12,000 people. It's a little like a spaceship landed. It's got this gorgeous courtyard in the middle. It's a circle.
With a diameter of about 1,500 feet, The circumference is almost 1 mile long. It is 4 stories tall with 3 more stories below ground. If the concept was a horizontal skyscraper, it worked. At 2,820,000 square feet, it beats One World Trade Center at only 2,600,000 square feet. The circle allows offices to be closer to each other, as you will always have at least 2 ways to get to someplace, or a third if you chose to cut through the center courtyard. This is why the building is like the Pentagon, a basic geometric shape, a massive office complex, a closed form so parts are as close to other parts as possible, and a secure facility that keeps out the public and from which you can plan world domination. Apple has always led the way when it came to industrial design, that other profession besides architecture that combines art and technology. And when they built Apple stores, their first architecture, they too were cutting edge, using finicky details that added cost but refined the modernity. I can only assume that occurs here at Apple Park, judging by the only thing I could see up close, the perimeter fence that kept me out. It is a safe assumption. Notice the fence is composed of small rectangular shafts of minimal detail. No basket twist wrought iron here. But the straight shafts are unrestrained at the top. Was the lack of the bar at the top a clever way to make it harder to scale the fence, or an aesthetic design feature? And lacking a top rail, that means each baluster has to be extra strong on its own, significantly increasing the cost. Very Apple. Apple Park was designed by the firm started by architect Norman Foster, aka Baron Foster, who is a British architect who has always been considered a part of the high-tech modern movement, the style that emphasized the machine and technical parts of a building. We saw that style in Architecture Codex video number 45, the Pompidou Center in Paris. Throughout the decades, his designs have shunned rectilinear Bauhaus modernism and historic styles and worked to explore the machine fabrication nature of buildings, unapologetically using metals and glass in all sorts of ways. In 1982, Norman Foster and Buckminster Fuller worked on an experimental sustainable house with 2 concentric geodesic domes that rotated independently to track the sun during the day and allow solid elements to fully close at night. Work ceased on that project when Fuller died in 1983. It is reported that Steve Jobs approached Foster and Partners and told them, "Don't consider me a client, consider me a collaborator." This is not that unusual, and depending upon the client, it can be a valid relationship. Steve Jobs, having spent years heading teams of designers who revolutionized personal electronics, is the kind of informed client with which architects can have a collaborative relationship. The idea that most modern architects work in isolation is not a complete myth, but certainly an exaggeration. I remember as a young architect reading an article in the New York Times Magazine where the reporter stated that there was a new kind of architect who would listen to their clients. Well, that was only new to that reporter, and probably because the New York Times fostered that false image of the architect as the lone designer dictating what the aesthetics were. For those of us who have practiced in the real world, we start with listening to our clients to find out what their objectives and their needs are. And when I get a client who asks me, could we do whatever, my response is usually, I am not a famous enough architect to tell you how to live. On the other hand, there are some clients who have no clue what they want the building to look like or what it should look like, and they rely on the architect to bring form to their goals. For these clients, we spend a lot of time listening to their objectives, and then I go back into the studio to produce a design or 2 or 3 as a way to hone the objectives and to sort of test the aesthetic tolerance of the client. And while I might be educating the client as to what makes good architecture, they are experiencing design as an iterative process. So occasionally clients will ask me before they hire me, what will my building look like? And I have to say, I don't know, because it's essential to go through the process before we come up with a valid design. I will tell them that the design will meet all their dreams, even if we don't know what that looks like just yet. And occasionally I will come back with a design and a client will say, wow, I never thought of that. To which I will respond, That's why you hire an architect. I am happy to work either way, with client as collaborator or in a more passive role, as my goal is good architecture and a happy client. But some potential patrons come to me with their feeble ideas scratched on graph paper and tell me, I don't need an architect, I just need someone to stamp my plans. Well, I don't do that. And by the way, I've seen your sketch and you do need an architect. But those clients are best avoided because I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince someone that I will add value to their project. While I was not able to get inside Apple Park, I had a mole who managed to get in as a guest. He said nothing struck him as unusually good or bad, and that it seemed like a typical upscale Silicon Valley office. From that and from some photos and written reviews, there is apparently nothing revolutionary about the interior office design. Although I have read some dissenting voices inside of Apple, for the most part the building appears to be a success. And the dissension may have more to do with Steve Jobs telling the architects what he wanted, rather than listening to what his employees might like. The office concept is more of the ubiquitous open collaborative office with loungy work areas, different commuting stations, and Silicon Valley amenities such as food and recreation. For the big tech companies, the goal has been to make the workplace fun, so you hang around longer and theoretically produce more, which has fostered the name fun employment. To give you a sense of how this office model impacts the surrounding community, a few years ago the Wall Street Journal ran an article about how difficult it was to buy bananas in Silicon Valley supermarkets. Apparently, the tech world provides so much free fruit to their employees that the demand for bananas for purchase in the open market was down. And rather than watch their produce turn brown, some supermarkets simply gave up stocking bananas. My mole refined the premise by noting that bananas were hard to come by in Whole Foods, but not in Trader Joe's, indicating a wonderful nuance of who shops where. The same economic isolation occurs as many employees shun public mass transit and even private cars and ride the free corporate buses in comfort to and from work. The open office plan came to fruition in the 70s as it replaced the more traditional perimeter private offices with a common secretary or accountant pool in the windowless center. Various furniture manufacturers have pushed the idea of landscaping the open office with different kinds of furniture to accommodate different kinds of tasks. The potential for creative office space was there, but it was culturally resisted, particularly by baby boomers. And the mundane default of this was the cubicle farm. While efficient in a Miesian single space kind of way, it has always represented diminished status. The Silicon Valley model, which includes loungy, collaborative, common workspace favored by millennials, is also being threatened by recent changes. The fundamental function of an office, a collaborative and common workspace, is vying with the home office as the preferred mode. In one sense, the tech world has facilitated the productivity of the home office, making office buildings obsolete. But others observe that A-quality offices, such as Apple Park, are not lacking tenants, even while 40% of offices in some major cities remain empty. Workplace Darwinism may push some traditional modes of office to extinction. From what I can see, I would give a positive review to Apple Park. It did not need to revolutionize the office building, it just needed to execute it really well, and it did. The site development and the iconic shape make this building project unusual, but also shows the expense to which Apple was willing to go in order to prevent building just another glass box in a sea of asphalt. And that is good. It is really just then an upscale office park, the kind of thing that companies flush with cash tend to build at their apex. And there's nothing particularly nefarious about the design. Until something like that happens. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture CodeX.